Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Stephanie Robertson, and I am the Director of Community Engagement and Inclusion with Duke University's Fuqua School of Business.
I'm Tom Szigethy. I'm the Associate Dean and Director of DuWell at this Duke Student Wellness Center.
And I'm Dan Gillison, the CEO of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.
And today we're going to have a conversation with Dan. We are super excited to have him talk to us here at Duke. And before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items. All of you are muted, and you will only be able to see three of us during this session. We will be speaking with Dan up until around 6:30ish, and we'll then open it up for Q&A from the audience. At that time, you will be able to write your questions in the Q&A box, and I will read them to Dan for him to answer. If we don't get to all the questions before 6:45, we will have an optional informal conversation with Dan and his team right after this session. We will get that separate link to you in the chat box or in the box here as well at the end of this portion of this evening. So before we dive into this conversation with Dan, though, I want to take a few moments for Tom and I to talk about why we are partnering together on this event. Tom, do you want to go ahead and go first?
Sure. And just to tell you a little bit about DuWell. DuWell is the health promotion area wellness center at Duke. We address risky behaviors. We try to get people to mitigate the behaviors. We also promote wellness practice and then offer opportunities for people to give back to the community. We all know that exercise and diet are great for health, but what we're trying to get everybody is that there's a lot of daily behaviors people can do for their mental health as well. Oftentimes people see mental health being taken care of by therapists and group counseling. And what we want to do is expand that thinking to how do we maintain our mental health on a daily basis. So we've partnered with Fuqua in order to talk with Dan and get a lot of good information from NAMI, the way we would look at mental health within business settings, and leadership opportunities as well.
Thank you. And in my role at Fuqua, the goal has been to create an inclusive community for students, staff, and faculty. So one in which we all can be our authentic selves. I think that is when we truly can thrive. One of our priorities has been making mental health an integral part of our diversity and inclusion efforts and increasing awareness while decreasing stigma. I believe that this is more important now than ever before, and that it is through great partnerships throughout our school and also through Fuqua that we are able to bring a variety of initiatives to our students, staff, and faculty to help promote mental health, to help destigmatize mental health conditions, and to make this a more inclusive community. My hope is to continue on with these initiatives, and Dan has been someone I've been trying to get here for a while, so I really appreciate that he answered my email because I understand that the work he's doing is extremely important, and I wanted him to be able to share it with you all as well. So we're going to move on, and I'm going to do a quick bio of Dan, and then we're going to get right into it. So Dan, who joined NAMI this past January, so he started when the insanity of the world began. He brings an expertise in nonprofit leadership and a passion for advocating for people with mental illness to his current position. Before joining NAMI, Dan led the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, where he was responsible for strategic planning, personnel management, board communications, oversight of APAF's public education programs, and outreach, and formulating strategic alliances and partnerships to further APAF's mission. Before that, Gillison led County Solutions and Innovation for the National Association of Counties, where he was instrumental in repositioning the organization's programs to provide expertise in health and human services, justice, and public safety. Dan has over 30 years of experience and has previously held leadership positions at Xerox, Nextel, and Sprint, and holds a BA from Southern University and A&M College. Welcome, Dan. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to be with you all this evening. Appreciate the opportunity.
Great. So let's dive right in and talk about NAMI, the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization. So Dan, can you talk a bit about NAMI and what is its main objectives and goals?
Yes, and wanted to start out by first of all thanking you all for the opportunity, and Stephanie and Tom, it's a wonderful opportunity to partner with you on this evening and to see the work that you're doing at the Fuqua School of Business, and then what you're doing, Tom, at DuWell. These are resources that many students at other universities don't have. So I really hope that your students really are taking advantage of those opportunities there at Fuqua and at DuWell. Now, speaking of NAMI, NAMI has been in place for 40 years, and in this started in 1979, and it was started by a group of moms who were advocating for their sons who had been diagnosed and assessed to have schizophrenia, and the mothers, and at that time were told that it was because of the way they were being raised. So there wasn't the science that there is now. So that's the first thing. And so from 79 to now, this grassroots organization began, and it started with a meeting of 259 family members in Madison, Wisconsin. And then it has grown to an organization that has over 650 affiliates across the United States, to include right there in North Carolina, where you are. So, we advocate for people that are living with a serious mental illness and their families. And we advocate across the pendulum of the life experience of a person living with a mental illness.
Great. So what does mental health mean? We hear that term a lot, that gets thrown around often. People usually interchange with mental illness versus mental health and the condition. How would NAMI approach one, and how do you define it?
Yeah, thank you. Mental health is like physical health. When you start thinking about the mental health and physical health, it's very different than mental illness. Now, what we say is that 1 in 5 Americans has a mental illness, but we all have mental health, just like we have physical health. So it's a little bit different from the standpoint of if you're looking at segmentation. Physical health and mental health go together. Mental illness is something that a person lives with, and it is a condition that is very different than looking at just mental health and physical health. And now the World Health Organization coined something years back that said there is no physical health without mental health. So you can't have one without the other.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So for those that do have mental illness, what is it that NAMI does to help decrease stigma around this?
Yeah.
We do a lot of work here at Fuqua and at Duke in general about having conversations, daring dialogues about our mental health in general, but for those that have mental health conditions, and creating spaces to help decrease stigma. I just want to hear more about that as well from you.
Yeah, well, a colleague of mine is with me, Jennifer Rothman, our senior manager of our youth and young adults initiative. So she may add something to that conversation later. But what I would say that the first thing we do is we say that you need to be open with the conversation. And we try to minimize the stigma by increasing the voices. And we talk about something that we have called In Your Own Voice. And we know the more that we talk about mental illness and the individuals living with it and thriving, it changes the conversation. So now specifically what we do is we advocate legislatively at the federal level, and then at the state level in those 648, 650 organizations I was speaking of, for legislation to impact mental illness in communities across the states. So funding, and support and infrastructure. Then we educate. We have programs that we make available across the United States for individuals and their families to actually talk about, well, what do I do? My sister, my brother, my aunt, my uncle, my mom, my dad, or my son or my daughter or my niece or my nephew, this is what they're going through. So we have a course called Family to Family. And that course helps the family navigate that experience and understand what their loved one is going through. We have another one called Homefront on Demand, which is for our veterans community and really for the families of veterans that are returning from being in the military theater or at war, if you will, in terms of what is it that my loved one is experiencing, and how do I help them navigate this world that they've come back to, that's very different than the world they've been in recently, being at war. And we have other programs, peer-to-peer, and then we have another one called Ending the Silence. And you mentioned stigma. That one is, if you think about the title, Ending the Silence. So it's saying, don't be silent. Let's address the stigma that's in the room, that's in the community. And that Ending the Silence program is one that we do in high schools, and then we matriculated into a program that we have for campuses called NAMI on campus.
That sounds great. Sounds awesome. This whole idea of ending the silence, to me as a practitioner, it sounds amazing. I'm also thinking we have a whole bunch of business students listening to this.
Yes.
Probably thinking, how am I going to be that vulnerable in a business setting? Or if I'm not personally dealing with a mental illness, what if I'm supervising someone who is? And how does the vulnerability of all of this become or can an asset in the business world? And does it play any role in the person being a leader?
Oh, absolutely it does. And if I could go back, I have some scripted notes here, but I just want to speak to you all, first of all, to the students, to say congratulations on being a student at Duke University, and then also being a business school student. That is incredible. And you are part of a very, very small minority, but you know that. And what comes with that is anxiousness, is excitement, but also expectations of what you're going to do when you get in the business world. And I was with Xerox for 21 years, and I also was in telecommunications, as you heard, for about 9 to 10 years, and ran our industry sectors in the telecommunications world. Highly competitive environments with high expectations. None any different than what has come with your body of work. So what I would say to you is, as I looked at some of the placements, if you will, from Bain to BCG, Boston Consulting Group, to Deloitte, to McKinsey, you're competing. So now let's talk about that CEO seat. Today's CEO who embraces mental health, who embraces the workforce from workplace mental health, has a competitive advantage. Why do they have that competitive advantage? Because 1 in 5, as you heard me say before, statistically lives with mental illness. One in 5, they're coming to the workplace. So that workplace and that leader that actually demonstrates, articulates that they care and that they are going to provide benefits to all employees and be inclusive, that is a competitive advantage. So the and let me speak to, Tom asked about vulnerability. I've been speaking on that a few times, and you show your strength and your vulnerability. So I've been in a couple of corporate environments where the CEOs have embraced mental health. One of those companies I'll speak of is American Express. They're doing some incredible work. And that leader at that time, so this was a few years back, but the leader talked about their experience with mental illness in their family. Their vulnerability showed strength. It showed empathy. It showed leadership. So guess what happened? It was a competitive advantage. It was a retention strategy. It was a development strategy. It motivated the workforce. It retained the workforce, and it showed that CEO, and what Stephanie mentioned, was authentic. And that's what you all want to be when you go into your environments and you get to the C-suite and you're managing a board and a workforce. You want to be read as being authentic, and you want to be shown as caring. You want to be able to get after the business and do it well. But addressing mental health in the workplace is a competitive advantage.
Really appreciate you breaking it down like that. We talk a lot about vulnerability here at Fuqua. We definitely put that as one of the traits that we value most with our students, but also our staff and faculty. So I do want to just touch on maybe any kind of advice or tools you can provide for all of our leaders to be more inclusive. So we also have staff on here, faculty. I pushed your event everywhere. So that's like, it might be a broad audience. So I was really excited. But it's staff and faculty and people who work in the universities and students who are going to go into the world, students here as well, what their times here. So they're going to be, they're going to be part of teams, they're going to lead teams, just tools in general for any person who's in a leadership position on creating a space that's inclusive.
Yeah, we have thank you. We have a number of resources on our website. We've created, during this period of time, we created a COVID guide. It's both in English and Spanish, and we have tied a number of resources in this body of work in terms of our COVID information. And these are resources for educators. These are resources for managers, and they're resources for individuals. So we've tried to digitize as many of our resources as possible in terms of how to navigate, what to look for, how to take, self-care is critically important. What should I do for myself, for my wellness, so that I can help others? So we have a number of resources that we have actually put on our website. I'm a virtual reality CEO. As you mentioned, Stephanie, I started in January, and on Friday, the 13th of March, we went totally virtual, and we've not been back to the office since. So why do I say that? Because a lot of the tools and assets that we have for the different communities that you just spoke about, the professors and the staff, and as well as the students and the administrators, we've digitized all of them and made them available on our website. Because that's our reality right now, is access to digital tools.
And for those of you that are able to join our informal conversation afterwards, like I said, I'll make sure to get that link, I guess, through the Q&A box. I might have to ask our multimedia guru, who is somewhere in the space with us, how I could do that. Dan has his colleague from NAMI, Jennifer Rothman, who will be able to share a lot of that information with us as well.
Mm-hmm.
So my next question is about the focus on marginalized communities and their mental health, but also dealing with stigma just in general of mental health conditions, and having to deal with all of that, plus a pandemic, plus discrimination and racism. Mind you, this discrimination and racism didn't just suddenly come about this year, but a lot of it, the spotlight has been on that this year. So I just want to hear more about NAMI's focus on this.
Yes.
And also, I'd love to hear your own, if you're comfortable with sharing your own personal kind of focus on this as well.
Yes. This has been an incredible year that I will fashion it like the legs on a chair. We've had COVID-19, we've had the economy and the downturn in terms of available jobs. We've had the racial trauma, and then we've had the election. What's common with those four legs of the stool is fear, uncertainty, and doubt. There's a fear in terms of COVID and your family and your personal well-being, your extended family's well-being. There is the uncertainty of when we will come out of it. And then there's the doubt. Now let's go to racial trauma. That's the same thing. What is this that we're experiencing? What is the doubt in terms of this, and then the uncertainty? And then let's go into the next two, the economy and the loss of jobs. Will they come back? When will they come back? Will I be one that's affected? And then the last one is the elections. No matter which side of the coin you're on, and we always say that we focus on policy, not politics. So we being NAMI, at the same time, we're looking through the lens that every other citizen is looking at, in the world is looking at, in terms of the elections. And no matter what side of the coin you're on, there's been uncertainty, doubt, and fear in terms of that. Now, coming full circle, what we've tried to do is really help where we can help in addressing this. Now, in terms of the racial trauma, if I can go there for a second, you heard me speak about COVID, and very early on in COVID, we pivoted and we created a very comprehensive guide of tools and assets to help all of the public navigate this. We also have a helpline, and our helpline is a resource line for an individual can call to get resources. So that's another part, Stephanie, is 1-800-950-NAMI. So that's another resource, and you can pick up the phone, call that number, and we will navigate resources for you. It probably is not foreign to you that what people are going through this year is different than it was previous years. Last year, this time, year over year, our calls were about resources for schizophrenia and depression. Schizophrenia and bipolar. Our calls are have gone up 65% this year. And this year they are on give me resources for anxiety and depression. So year over year, it's changed. So now let's talk about my personal experience. I'm no different than any other person in terms of uncertainty and doubt. I've had experiences in terms of worrying about COVID and accessing family. I've also had the concerns about isolation. I get my energy from the industry of people and seeing movement and being in an environment where I see the traffic flow of people as well as cars and industry and commercial vehicles and all of that. And all of a sudden I'm working 24/7 in my office. And that is something that I've had to be mindful of personally from the standpoint of my own self-care. And sometimes I have to step back and recognize, okay, Dan, understand that this will pass. So now let's talk about the experience with a racial trauma. This is one that is very concerning. We have, let me speak to it from NAMI first. We've taken a position on it very early on. You can go to our website and see my statement in terms of racism and our thinking on it in terms of what it is, in terms of an illness. And we've been very direct in terms of looking to be very intentional and being anti-racist. So now with that said, we understand what the landscape looks like and what is and what isn't. We don't want a us versus them. We want it to be all of us together. So the challenge is, how do we make that happen? And what do we do to make it happen? Now, so we're doing some things at NAMI to address that inside of our diversity, equity, and inclusion department and organization. So we're very intentional in our body of work to get into disparate communities with that work. Now let me go full circle to the last part of the question, which was me, and if I would share anything personally. On the racial justice piece, pause for a second because I've had both good and bad experiences. I have been stopped while driving to work and with a colleague in the car. Would it shock you to know I wasn't speeding? Would it shock you to know that I wasn't out of my lane? And I was stopped because I had a late model vehicle that the windows were tinted, but this wasn't about the tint because the officer said it was 1 degree out of compliance, if you will. And my buddy who was across from me, he couldn't believe it. A white guy from Louisiana, he kept asking the officer, "What are you doing? Look at that truck passing by. Look at that vehicle." And I kept telling him, "Be quiet, be quiet, be quiet." So that was he didn't understand. He couldn't grasp why was I telling him to be quiet, and it was my right. And I told him, you just let us navigate this, and then I'll tell you later. That's one experience. My son was an honor roll student in college, and he had an experience. Where he was actually stopped and supposedly he and his buddy had vandalized a car as they were walking from dinner at their university. They were walking from dinner, and two students were trying to get into a party on a Friday night. No Duke students know about parties on Friday night, right? So these two young men couldn't get in, got upset, and threw a rock through the homeowner's window. My son and his best friend were like 10 minutes away from this. They were further down this main road, but the police saw two young men of color. They stopped them. They pulled their revolvers. They told them if they moved, they would shoot them, and they handcuffed them on the street while their peers walked by. And then they went to get the homeowner to come down and identify them. And the homeowner said, "What are you doing?" They look nothing like the people that were stopped. They look nothing like. Now, I would ask you, what does that mean for that college student in terms of the rest of their matriculation through school when they see police? And it took my son a year for me to share that story, because back then I was working with the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and I would have immediately got in my car, and he knows this, and driven to where he was in college. So my dad pointed out that my son may have helped me and saved me, because I was, even a year later when he shared it with me, quite upset. But what it goes to is now trauma, and there's trauma that he's experiencing. And I'll close with the fact that even now I get concerned when he's driving, and I get concerned when I see lights behind me. That shouldn't be, but it is. Now, on the other side of that, I've had very good friends that have been in law enforcement, but there is something going on right now that we need to examine in terms of the experiences that we're all going through. So that's a little bit about my personal experience, and it's probably a little bit too lengthy, but I'll stop there.
I appreciate it. I don't think it was too lengthy at all. With everything that you had just shared, from the virtual CEO to COVID to all of the issues that the whole community has addressed over this year, and then on top of that, your personal story and experiences, I kind of feel stupid asking this last question, which would be, what has been maybe one of the biggest challenges that you faced in the past year?
Wow, one of the biggest challenges I've faced. Really trying to make sure that our workforce is doing well, and they are fully engaged, and knowing that our body of work is making a difference. That's one of the biggest challenges, and also making sure that we are engaged in the conversations and we have a seat at the table. Not necessarily a challenge as much as ensuring that we keep that energy going, we keep that voice very forward thinking in terms of making sure we're a part of the conversation. And the other part of the challenge is engaging with the mental health community, and making sure that we're all engaging to look at mental health differently. We need a transformative mental health system. If you look at this system before we went into COVID, it's no different than a business executive running an organization. There's the before, the during, and the after. And what we looked at is that for the last 20 years, we've been saying that this mental health system is fragmented. So one of the biggest challenges that we've been looking at is, okay, if it was fragmented before we went into COVID, what is it during COVID? And what can we as leaders do to address that fragmentation and look for it to be different coming out? And we need to transform mental health system. So one of my biggest challenges is making sure that we get other leaders in the C-suite having that conversation, and making sure that we consistently message that out. That we need a transformative mental health system, and what that will look like. That's one of the biggest challenges. And then also staying constant, being virtual. This is while it's nice to be able to sometimes not be in traffic, that's a challenge when you're the new CEO and you're trying to really navigate the organization, understand the culture of the workforce, actually put your DNA into the culture. Very difficult when you're virtual. So that's been, I think that last part has been my biggest challenge.
Yeah. I want to thank you for all the information you shared, but not only talking about vulnerability in leadership, but given us an example, personal example of showing what it's all about and how to do it. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you very much, and appreciate all the work that you all are doing, and for this opportunity for NAMI to address you. It really is very much appreciated.
Thanks.
Mhm.
At this point, I will try to open it up for Q&A. I guess you can put it in the box and it'll come up. I've confessed that this is one of my first times doing a webinar in this way. So I'm used to having the chat box, and there's a question. So Joseph is asking about evaluating impact. I actually was thinking this as well. So how do you know when you're accomplishing the NAMI mission, particularly while thinking about ending stigma? Thank you so much for that question.
Yeah, Joseph, we appreciate that question, and I ask myself that every day from the standpoint of quantifying and qualifying impact. So the way we look at it is from the standpoint of, particularly while thinking about ending stigma. That's a huge social question from the standpoint of, and an opportunity in terms of stigma. We know that we are accomplishing the mission as we've seen from a demographic standpoint, younger people coming into the conversation. If you look at what we're here to talk about right now, what I've seen just in my 11 months is that we're having younger people coming into this body of work, and we're having younger people open up the conversations about their lived experience. And we're also seeing some national campaigns that are in the development to address stigma. So that is a part of the work. And we do measure some of our work from the standpoint of our partnerships and level of engagement and our convenings. We just did our convention this year. We do a convention every year, and it's normally an in-person convention. We usually have between 12 to 1,600 people at the convention. This year, it was the first year we did it virtual. And I just mentioned a metric, 1,200 to 1,600 people, all there to talk about stigma, to address stigma. We had 12,000 participants this year from 37 different countries and the United States. So that was another way for us to know we were accomplishing the mission. And the other thing we did is in one of our plenary sessions, we launched a relationship with PBS and with Well-Beings, which is a national campaign that you can learn more of on our site as well. So we tried to address the youth market with that, if you will, or the youth sector. And we also were very impressed that 12,000 people from across the United States and 37 countries would want to be at our two-day conference. Convention, excuse me.
So Aman is asking, what are you seeing with generational differences regarding stigma?
Yes, thank you for that question. My generation, I'm 63 years of age, and in my career, I've been a hiring manager many times in the private sector. And what I'm seeing in the generational differences is that for several decades, in terms of my body of work, I would be bringing people into the private sector. They would never talk about their health, physical or mental. They would never talk about it. Here are the generational differences. The generation now, they have an expectation of their employer when they come in to talk about an opportunity. What they will do is say, I live with a mental condition. I live with a mental health condition. What kind of benefits and support do you provide for me? And if they don't disclose to that extent, they will ask the question about, tell me more about your health benefits. And they will ask the question, their strength is in the questions that they ask, and they're competing. You are competing to bring them into the workforce. So what I'm seeing is that in the workforce. And then also Jennifer Rothman, we just had a youth and young adults webinar last week, what we call a virtual town hall. These were all young adults from all over the country that had never met one another. You would not have known it if you came into the meeting like 15 minutes after it started. The generational differences are, this generation of adults are speaking to each other, are encouraging each other, are sharing best practices with each other, and they are addressing their life situation with mental health. So that's what I'm seeing as a generational difference.
Thank you again. And Vinesh, is a really long question. Thank you. I can make fun of him because I know him. He's one of our Fuqua students. First off, he appreciates you joining today. He wants to talk about the recent election and how it showed the deep division in our country's population on a variety of ideological bases. Can you talk about some of the complexities of, complexities of ensuring mental health while trying to have some of these incredibly difficult policy conversations?
Yeah, in terms of that question, Vanessa, it's a great question. One of the things that we did, or I did when I came in, is I got with a colleague I'd known for a number of years that's a CEO for another mental health organization, and I met him at a conference in Denver probably 7 years ago. And back then, we didn't know each other, but we were both on the dais for that, and we promised that at some point in our careers we'd work together. 7 years later, we were in this situation as I was the new CEO, and here's what we did. We looked at that fragmented mental health system, and we said, and he wanted to get together to look at the funding during COVID, which we did. We helped with funding for telehealth and some other things. And I said, well, I want to get this group together, and that'll be part of our mission, really trying to strengthen the conversation and addressing those complexities on funding for mental health during COVID. But I want to broaden the conversation with these CEOs and talk about, as leaders, is there anything that we can do to address the infrastructure and the mental health system coming out of COVID? It would be a shame as leaders if we didn't look at this as an opportunity to at least convene and see if we can come up with something. So the complexity is that we brought together CEOs that have their own audiences, their own areas of focus, and we were able to bring them together starting in late March through this week, matter of fact, to actually put a plan together to address the policy conversations. And we brought disparate groups together. We brought Democrats and Republicans, and we brought groups that are in different parts of the conversation and the infrastructure on mental health. And what you'll see is a comprehensive body of work that will help with those difficult policy conversations, because, you know, mental health and mental illness doesn't know a party. It doesn't know Republicans. It doesn't know independents. It doesn't know Democrats, and it doesn't know race. It just knows mental illness. It knows mental health. So we've been able to keep this group together, even with their differences in terms of their audiences. And we're excited about what we will be coming out with in terms of the complexities and those difficult policy conversations.
Then we have Tyrell has asked, as future business leaders, how do we make sure that we're being vulnerable in the workplace? And how do we help make others comfortable being vulnerable as well?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. And I think that, you know, it's first of all, it's you want to be confident in your space, your skills, your competencies, your attributes. So if you've learned well, if you have really matriculated through the university environment and you're in a good place in the workplace, I would tell you first is to assess your environment and test to see the receptivity in the environment, and then find out where that gap is in terms of the culture and how you can best address it from your lens. So that's what I would offer to you as future business leaders is, let me look at this question again. How do we as future business leaders, how do we make sure that we're being vulnerable in the workplace? And how do we help make other comfortable being vulnerable in the workplace? I would tell you, I've been talking to different people that entertainers, if you will, and athletes. And what's so interesting is that, you know, everyone has been very closed in, and all of a sudden now they're starting to share. And what I continuously try to do at every opportunity is say, you know what, there's two ways of demonstrating strength. One is pushing down and the other is pulling up. And what you're doing is you're pulling other people up. So, and you're helping so many others with your vulnerability. And this is also goes into, you know, we have I tell the staff all the time, there's medicine for a lot of physical diseases, such as diabetes, such as heart disease, such as kidney disease, but there's no medicine for envy and jealousy. So what I would share with you is that be yourself, be authentic, own it, and just be the best you can be. Understand what it is that you want to do in the workplace and why you're doing what you're doing. And as long as you can answer the question to yourself why you're doing what you're doing, you'll know what to do in that workplace. And you'll be seen. And the last thing I'll say, this is about leadership. So that vulnerability, and let me close by saying, this is about leadership, Terrell, that question. So your leadership will come through in how you focus on that. Do I have a daily routine? Yeah, I listen to my wife of 39 years. So that's my routine. No, I would say to you that I need to do better with that. I would tell you that what I do early in the morning is I reflect. I graciously say thank you. I don't look at what I'm up against and all of that. I always try to step back for a second. You mentioned journaling and meditation. I get about 300 emails a day, so I tried the journaling and it hasn't worked. But what I do is every morning and every night, I just stop and say thank you. And I try to look at what we've accomplished and what we're looking to do versus focusing on what we didn't get accomplished. So that's pretty much what I do. I wake up every morning and I say, here's an opportunity to make a difference. Let's get after it. And I don't look at the woe is I. I started at 8 yesterday morning. I didn't end till 8 and I had not eaten the whole day, but I still was grateful for what we were able to get done on the day. Now, I do need to create balance. That is something that some of the staff and my wife have told me, so I'm working on it. So I want to make sure I share that with you. If you've got any tools for me, I'd be welcome to be very receptive to listening to them, because I am a type A, and so I try to create balance. And what I will tell you is that what I've started doing is going back to a love that I have, which is tennis. So I played in school, and now I have been going back to, like, for instance, last night, I grabbed a couple of slices of bread and I ran to the tennis courts, and I played tennis last night at 10 o'clock because what I'm seeing is that that's my therapy.
Yeah, I'll share with you. You're always welcome at all the virtual programs that we're doing at Duke.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more at least, and then we can transition to the other the question and answer area. But Tasha has written in of how can colleges help support students to graduate whole? What are some best mental health support practices that you're familiar with at campuses across the country?
I'd like to yield that one to Jennifer Rothman, if I can, in terms of, I have not had the opportunity to drill down on in terms of the body of work at campuses across the country. I can tell you that in some of the inspection I have been able to do and the due diligence, Tasha, that what you have there in DuWell and there at Duke is not everywhere. And it's not pervasive across universities everywhere. So that's the first thing. So leverage that and make sure you're taking advantage of it. I can tell you there are universities that are starting to try and do more in the area of mental wellness and creating wellness departments. But they're coming up. I would tell you that the more of them are modeling what you're doing at Duke, and they're looking to look at your program to see if it's scalable to do at their campuses. There are some that are doing it, and I will tell you that more of them are starting to do it. I can't speak to the best mental health support practices? I would love to be able to, answer that, but I don't have that data.
I may have put the link to the next session in here. If I haven't, I think I do need our awesome multimedia person to help me out. But we will be transitioning to another part of this, which is an informal conversation. So if questions weren't answered in this particular session, or if you want to learn more about the resources that NAMI has, learn more about the resources that we have here at Duke, please join us. Okay, so Madeline just put it up for y'all. Hope everyone sees it. I do want to add one more quick question, and then we're going to end it here and then transition over to the other session, which is going to be a lot more informal. We'll be able to see people. So I love seeing y'all. It's been awesome. But to be able to see other people who have questions as well. Marin asked a question, and let's end it on this. What keeps you up at night, and what gives you hope?
What keeps me up at night is the division of the country, the division of physical health from mental health. There's no question that somebody can go and they played soccer and they tore their ACL. They messed up their shoulder from volleyball or baseball or whatever. And so what keeps me up at night is the fact that we really do address physical health much different than mental health. That keeps me up at night. And then looking at the trauma, the racial trauma, what keeps me up at night is what I didn't share with you is my son was an honor roll student. But it didn't matter that he was an honor roll student. It doesn't matter that he speaks Japanese as well as I mean, that's his second language in terms of what he took in college. That didn't matter on that night. So that keeps me up at night. What keeps me up at night is my wife walking, and when we bought our home down the cul-de-sac, and the police following her in a patrol car, wanting to know what she was doing on the street. Those are the things that keep me up at night, because I think that's a part of where we're not. And then the mental health piece keeps me up at night from the standpoint of, let's address mental illness, let's address mental health, and let's look at it in the same lens that we do physical health. And then what gives me hope is this opportunity right here, is you all being receptive to having this conversation and inviting us to speak with you. That gives me more hope than you know. It gives me a lot of energy, and it tells me that things can get better. So that's what gives me hope.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for being a part of this and for joining us. And sharing your stories with us as well. We really do appreciate that. Mm-hmm. And Tom, did you have anything else before we transition over?
And I was going to say thank you as well. I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate all the answers, the openness and honesty, and the realness that you bring.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you to all of you all for what you do, the administrators, the educators, and the students. You guys are wonderful, and it's just a pleasure to be with you on this evening. Thank you.